My parents turned down the chance to pay $120,000 to save my daughter's life, yet they had no qualms about spending $300,000 on my sister's extravagant wedding. Meanwhile, my in-laws sold their home to save their granddaughter. 5 years later, my revenge left my parents with nothing. If you've ever thought that family is a pillar of support, my story might make you reconsider. I once believed in the strength of family ties, but when my daughter needed help the most, my parents, the very people who should have stood by me, chose social gatherings and appearances over their own granddaughter's life. Now, after losing everything, they come back to me, begging for assistance. But I am no longer the weak man I once was. I'm Daniel, 32 years old, and I own a modest interior design business in Austin, Texas. I'm not wealthy, but I'm not struggling either. I earn enough to provide for my wife and our 8-year-old daughter, Lily. I work diligently to maintain a stable life, not extravagant, but free from the daily worries of making ends meet. My family isn't part of the upper class, but my parents, Martin and Linda, have always wanted to project that image. They run a well-known family-owned furniture store, not rich, but comfortable enough to afford a spacious home, nice cars, and weekend parties with friends. To them, success isn't measured by happiness but by how others perceive them. As the eldest son, I've always felt the weight of favoritism. If I brought home an A, my parents would simply nod, as if it were expected. But if Rachel, my younger sister, got a B+, they would celebrate with cake and fanfare. When I went off to college, they barely acknowledged my achievement, but when it was Rachel's turn, they threw her a grand farewell party, even though she was only attending a local school. Growing up in that environment taught me early on that I couldn't rely on my family. I threw myself into my work, became independent, and built everything from the ground up. I never expected anything from my parents, but I could never have imagined the day they would choose a party over their granddaughter's life. After graduating from college, I started working at a small interior design firm in Austin, beginning as a design assistant. The job wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. Every blueprint, every little detail in a space, gave me the satisfaction of creating something meaningful. 2 years later, after gaining enough experience, I decided to branch out and start my own interior design company. It wasn't large, but it allowed me to be independent and pursue my passion. That was when I met Emma. It was a sunny afternoon in September when I was managing my small furniture store, busy rearranging the space and checking inventory. She walked in, looking for a reading chair. At first, I thought she was just another customer, but somehow we ended up sitting down and talking for an hour about books, music, dreams, and unfinished plans. A year later, we got married, and soon after, Lily came along, a small, lively girl with bright, sparkling eyes just like her mother, Emma. We thought nothing could break our happiness. Although we weren't rich, we had enough. I ran my small interior design company, and Emma worked as a preschool teacher. Life was busy, but it was fulfilling. However, there was one thing we were careless about: health insurance. As a small business owner, I didn't have employer-provided insurance, and private plans were expensive. Since we were all healthy, we decided to put it off until we were more financially stable, a decision I would come to regret for the rest of my life. Lily was always full of energy, but one winter evening, 5 years ago, when she was just 3, I noticed something was wrong. She had a persistent cough at night. At first, Emma and I thought it was just a cold, but the cough didn't go away. After a few weeks, it worsened. She became fatigued, lost her appetite, and had a low-grade fever that wouldn't break. Sometimes, she would suddenly stop playing to catch her breath. One afternoon, while Emma was playing with her in the living room, Lily suddenly collapsed. "Mommy, I'm so tired," she said. Emma panicked, scooping her up and calling me immediately. I rushed home to find my daughter breathing rapidly, her eyes unfocused. Without hesitation, I carried her to the car and drove straight to the emergency room. The doctor's expression was tense when he returned with the CT scan results. "Daniel, we've discovered a congenital abnormality in Lily's lung. It's compressing her airway, and she needs surgery immediately before her condition worsens." The ground beneath me felt like it had collapsed. A lung mass in a 3-year-old? How could this be happening to my child? I had always thought of Rachel as someone who would protect, help, and support me. Yet there she stood, in a tailored gown with a champagne glass in hand, looking at me as if I were an inconvenience. I abandoned my pride and dropped to my knees right in the middle of the crowded party. "Rachel, I'm begging you, just help with a small part. I'll pay you back, but Lily, she will die without this money." I looked into her eyes, hoping to find some humanity left in her, but she took a step back as if I were a filthy beggar. She scoffed, "You think I'm going to cancel my wedding over this? I am responsible for my fiancé and the family I'm building. I'm sorry, but I can't help." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had just knelt before my sister, and she laughed in my face. Around me, guests whispered, some chuckled, while others shook their heads, as if I were a pathetic fool making a spectacle of myself. My father touched my shoulder, his voice cold as ice. "Get up, Daniel. Stop embarrassing the family in front of our guests." I slowly rose to my feet, but I was no longer their son. I looked at each of them before speaking, my voice laced with bitterness. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Rachel. Today, I finally understand who my real family is and who is just a stranger." Then I turned and walked away, never looking back. As I exited the house, the sky opened up, and rain poured down. Heavy raindrops pelted my face, but I stood frozen on the doorstep, unable to feel anything except the crushing pain in my chest. I had begged, I had knelt, and in return, all I received was cruel indifference. I rushed to my car, slammed the door shut, and for the first time, I broke down and cried like a child. I no longer tried to hold it in, I buried my head against the steering wheel, my sobs choking in my throat. The storm outside blended with the storm raging inside me. But then an image flashed through my mind, Lily. She was waiting for me, fighting for every breath in that hospital room. I couldn't fall apart here. I took a deep breath, wiped my tears, and stepped on the gas, speeding straight back to the hospital. When I arrived, my in-laws were already there. They weren't wealthy, just ordinary working-class people, but the moment I stepped inside, my mother-in-law rushed to me, gripping my hands tightly, her eyes filled with worry. "Daniel, why are you soaked? Did you talk to your parents? Will they help?" I couldn't answer, but she only needed to look into my eyes to understand. My father-in-law quietly placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's okay. We'll figure it out ourselves." We sat down with Emma, determined to act immediately. The following day, I started selling everything I could. My beloved car was gone in an instant for $115,000. Every last cent of our savings, $25, was completely wiped out. I borrowed from friends and colleagues. The people at my company, many barely making ends meet, still stepped up to help. A young employee who had only been with us for 6 months pressed $500 into my hand. "Boss, I don't have much, but this is all I can give." An old coworker, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, called and sent me $3,000. "I owe you a favor, it's time I repaid it." Every coin, every bill, and every small contribution came together to save Lily, but it still wasn't enough. I sold my computer, my watch, and even our furniture. Our apartment grew emptier by the day, and yet I was still $440,000 short. Just as I was struggling to figure out where to find the remaining $40,000 to reach the $120,000 total, my in-laws called. "Daniel, how much more do you need?" My father-in-law's voice was steady and unwavering. I swallowed hard, reluctant to say the amount, but I had no other choice. "There's still $40,000 left." Silence on the other end, then my mother-in-law spoke, her voice unusually calm. "All right, come pick up the money tomorrow." I was utterly stunned. "But where are you getting that much money?" My father-in-law let out a soft chuckle, filled with love yet determination. "We sold our house. As long as Lily gets better, it's worth it." I stood frozen. They had sold their own home to save their granddaughter. My parents had turned their backs on their flesh and blood, yet my in-laws, who shared no blood ties with me, were willing to sacrifice everything. I landed a $2 million interior design project for a major real estate corporation. 3 years later, my company had grown fivefold. What was once a small business with just a handful of employees had now become one of the leading interior design firms in the region. My name started appearing in business magazines, with headlines like "From Zero to Millionaire, The Journey of Daniel, the man who rebuilt his life after adversity." It was a success story written in tears. My parents had indeed read those articles. They had seen me on television speaking at an entrepreneurial conference. But this time, I was no longer Daniel, the son who needed their help. I was Daniel, the self-made entrepreneur who had built everything from the ashes. A year ago, I sat down for an interview with Forbes after my company was recognized as one of the 50 fastest-growing interior design firms. The journalist looked at me with curiosity and admiration in her eyes. "Daniel, what drove you to achieve your success today?" I smiled, a smile only I could fully understand. I once had a family that should have been my greatest support, but they turned their backs on me when I needed them the most. I knelt before them, begging for help to save my daughter, and they told me they had already spent all their money on my sister's wedding. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you saying they chose to throw a wedding instead of saving their own granddaughter's life?" I nodded. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And I want to thank them. Their coldness and cruelty drove me to prove I didn't need them. Because of them, I turned my anger into success. I didn't hide, I didn't speak in vague terms. I called them out by name, my parents, Martin and Linda, and my sister, Rachel. Thank you for teaching me that family isn't about blood, it's about the people who stand by you when you need them the most." The interview aired, and then the headlines exploded. "Millionaire entrepreneur reveals how his family abandoned his dying daughter for a lavish wedding." "Shocking truth, grandparents let their granddaughter suffer while throwing a luxury party, when money matters more than life." The chilling story of a heartless family. My story went viral. Millions were outraged. Social media was flooded with comments like, "I can't believe such heartless people exist," and "What kind of grandparents treat their granddaughter like trash?" Rachel's husband must have regretted marrying a woman who would rather let her niece die than cancel a party. But the storm was only beginning for them. After the interview, my partners cut ties with my parents. Longtime clients canceled contracts, and business connections disappeared. The same people who once raised their glasses with them at lavish parties now avoided them like a plague because no one wants to work with monsters. My parents were pushed out of the business world they once stood proudly among, and now they had nothing left, alone and ruined. As for Rachel, she once thought she had one. She had an extravagant wedding, a beautiful husband, and a comfortable life. She used to look at me with pity, thinking I was a failure for kneeling before her. But now her world was falling apart. When her husband, Alex, read my interview, he was horrified. "Rachel, is this true?" he stammered, searching for an excuse. But the truth is the truth. A few days later, Alex filed for divorce. He couldn't stay married to a woman who let her niece suffer to throw a party. Rachel lost everything. A marriage built on cold-heartedness was never going to last. In the end, the heartless ones were left with nothing but themselves. Years ago, I had knelt before them, begging for help. They had laughed at me and told me I wasn't worth more than a party. But now it was the world that had turned its back on them, and I had no regrets. My success wasn't just a sweet revenge against those who had turned their backs on me, it was also an opportunity to repay the people who had believed in me and stood by me during my darkest moments. I returned to my friends, colleagues, and employees, the ones who had given every last dollar to help save Lily. I wanted to help them, to give back tenfold what they had given me. I called them to my office, handing them thick envelopes of cash. For some, I even offered to pay off their debts or invest in their dreams. But they refused. They just smiled, their eyes warm, just like the day they had placed their last savings into my hands. "Boss, you don't need to do this. You've done something that not everyone can do, overcome everything. We helped you because we believed in you, not because we expected anything in return." I couldn't find the words to respond. Choosing to live in a rental was a sacrifice I couldn't let go unanswered. After Lily was discharged, I spent an entire year working to restore what my in-laws had lost. I secretly tracked down the new owner of their former house, negotiated, made offers, and eventually repurchased it. The day I handed them the keys, my mother-in-law froze, her eyes welling with tears. "Daniel, how?" she began, her voice trembling. I smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder.
You gave me everything when I had nothing. This is the least I can do to repay you."
My father-in-law stood silent for a moment, then clapped a firm hand on my shoulder, his eyes filled with pride.
"I never once doubted you, son."
We all sat together that night for an authentic family dinner, something I hadn't felt in a long time. 5 years after Lily's hospitalization, as our family prepared to welcome a new member, I decided it was time for a change. I bought a bigger home, not just for Emma, Lily, and our soon-to-be-born baby, but also so my in-laws could move in with us. They had given me a home when I had lost everything. Now I wanted them to have a life where they no longer had to worry about anything. Lily was overjoyed to learn she was going to have a sibling, but when I told her that her grandparents would be living with us, she jumped up and hugged me tightly.
"Daddy, I'll get to see Grandma and Grandpa every day." I smiled, ruffling her hair.
"That's right, sweetheart.
They'll always be here with you."
Watching Lily's radiant smile, I felt it deep in my heart. Everything had finally come full circle. I thought I would never see my parents again, but unexpectedly, a month ago, while I was in my office reviewing contracts for a new project, my phone rang.
An unknown number. I hesitated for a moment but picked up. "Daniel, it's Mom."
That voice, the voice I hadn't heard in years, the voice of the woman who had watched me beg in desperation and then turned her back on me. Now, that same voice carried regret and pleading.
"Can you help us?" I didn't say a word.
She let out a shaky breath before continuing, her voice trembling.
"We're in trouble. We mortgaged the house, and now the bank is about to seize it. We need $200,000 to keep it, $200,000.
I remembered the day when I needed just $120,000 to save my daughter's life, and they had chosen a party over their granddaughter. I recalled the moment I knelt before them, begging for help, and they refused without hesitation. I remembered my father's cold eyes, Rachel's smug smile, and their voices telling me that a wedding mattered more than life. And now, when they needed me, they thought I would help. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm.
"Mom, do you remember the day I came begging for your help?" Silence. "That day, I knelt in front of you and Dad.
I told you that without the money, Lily might die.
Do you remember?"
Her voice cracked. "I remember, but you refused. You said Rachel's wedding was more important.
You let me walk away without a second thought." She started sobbing.
"I know I was wrong, but please, Daniel, we really need you."
I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Let me ask you this, Mom, between a party and your house, which one is more important?" She fell silent.
"That day, you chose a party over saving your granddaughter, and today, after losing everything, you think I would choose to save you?" She sobbed harder.
"But we're family, Daniel. Family helps each other."
I laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow laugh.
"No, Mom.
My real family already helped me. It was my in-laws, my colleagues, strangers who had more kindness than my blood."
She tried again, desperate. "You can't be this heartless. You can't let us lose everything." I spoke firmly. "Mom, I lost you and Dad the day you abandoned me and Lily."
Then, without hesitation, I hung up.
After putting Lily to bed that night, I sat in the living room and told Emma and my in-laws everything.
I recounted my mother's call, how they were on the verge of losing their home, and how I had refused to help them. I thought Emma would agree with me, but instead, she just looked at me for a long time, then gently took my hand.
"Daniel, I understand why you don't want to help them, but maybe you should think about it again." I frowned, unable to believe what I was hearing.